today's topic is managing your Marketo Engage database hygiene. It's probably one of the biggest pain points for most people using Marketo, and I will be taking you through this content today. So I'm James Fletcher. I'm a Marketo solutions architect. I've been using Marketo for about 14 years now. So it's been a long time, and there's been a lot of challenges surrounding data, especially as we start to look at how do we scale, how do we make things automated, importantly, how do we maximize what we have in our existing databases. Now, there's a few areas that we'll cover today, and again, if you do have any questions, do put them in the Q&A section. We're going to look at why poor quality data prevents you from seeing marketing successes. We're going to look at why your license fee is a challenge to control. You know, how do we control it? How do we make sure that we're not continually spending more money on license fee from a Marketo or Adobe Marketo license fee perspective? We're going to look at some examples as well around rules to remove unnecessary data from your database. So again, what can we do in order to clean stuff up? We'll then look at using data hygiene reporting and monitoring. So what can we do to always keep an eye on our database size? And importantly, what can we do to keep it in a manageable state? Because no one enjoys these one-off cleanups as we go through the database. And then we can look at also how can we deduplicate the data within our database as well. So for those of you who haven't been introduced to JTF Marketing yet, we are a specialist marketing automation consultancy focusing on Marketo. So you'll see some of the brands on the screen here who actually use Marketo on a daily basis. And we get involved with all kinds of companies. So from technology companies, software startups, through to manufacturing organizations going through digital transformations or financial services. And the use cases, of course, vary, right? So from technical implementation to how can we, what could the system do for us? So often we love those challenges, those open-ended questions of we want to do this, how do we go and achieve it? So if you've got any of those, we'd love to speak to you and find out how we might be able to work together and even just share some ideas. Now, let's dive straight in. I think most of us who work in marketing are aware that data is the foundation of what we do. There's, of course, a great challenge when it comes to data, and who is the owner of the data set tends to be the biggest question that we have. Now, as we look at marketing automation as a solution for scaling marketing activities as well as our sales activities, there's a few impacts, right? So we've got to be really careful when we start blasting out large campaigns to be personalized, but if the data is not correct, then we might not get the level of personalization or the level of engagement that we may want. Now, there's a few areas, data quality impacts not only the personalization piece, but it will actually also impact whether we've got a clear picture of the people we're targeting and whether that information is correct. So again, duplicated records, maybe we've got split intelligence, maybe we've got a previous job title versus the latest job title. Maybe there's been a name change because someone got married or even divorced. In some cases, so again, how do we make sure we track those and keep our data up to date? When we talk about lead scoring, a lot of us focus on lead scoring as a tool to help our sales teams prioritize leads and focus in on conversions. But again, how do we make sure that that score is accurate if we've got bad quality data? Maybe we're missing key data points that we actually want to score upon. So often when I'm talking to different customers about lead scoring, we talk about when are we collecting this data? Are we collecting it at the right point in time in order to be able to score it? And often you'll find, there'll be something like, the sign-off level or something like that, which we'll be capturing. And maybe we can't tell it from a job title, so we can't actually predict that from a lead scoring perspective. So it's actually a qualification term more than it is a lead scoring term. So again, we've just got to be really careful in terms of how do we structure those? When are we collecting the data? How are we utilizing that data? And importantly, if we have any gaps. Now, one of the big things that I talk about often is looking at the exceptions, right? Tell me who doesn't have a job title so that I can go and fill those job titles in and use technology to automate some of that process. So some of you will know tools like Cognism, ZoomInfo. Again, how do we use those in a clever way which help us fill in the gaps and make sure that we're progressing and expanding our database or our data quality? Again, I think one of the challenges around lead quality is often the feedback from sales, right? So we're creating these leads, depending on who's responsible for them, we're then pushing them to sales to go and follow up. And we know the age-old story of the silver spoon for the salespeople to put straight into their mouth to get the deal closed. That always isn't possible, right? So again, how do we manage that from an ongoing perspective? Who takes responsibility for following up on those leads? Whether it's missing data points, whether it's the right job title, you know, the size of the company that helps us root it within the business. Again, how do we make sure that we are getting these leads to the point of sale as quick as we possibly can? And then we talk about bloated database size, right? So I'm sure many of you on this call have come across conversations with our friends at Adobe in terms of your license fee. You know, where are you against your consumption, if you even are aware of what your license fee is? And importantly, how do we then control it? How do we make sure that the people we have in our database are the right people? So there is always bigger is better when it comes to marketing databases, but the reality is actually quality is better. Conversion, engagement is better than just a big database of 5 million contacts. If they're not engaging, let's get rid of them. Let's spend less money and focus that investment on actually engaging these individuals. So again, how do we take those views? How do we stand strong in our viewpoints as well with the business and say, look, we're not getting any engagement. Why do we need to keep them here within Marketo, which is a price per contact, of course, if you're not aware of that. So here's some tips for controlling your license fee. So we face this kind of endless process in marketing of budget cuts or budget changes. Sometimes we get a little bit more budget because, you know, we're seeing some success. But again, how do we start to manage that? There's a couple of key things that we can start to look at. We can remove anybody who's inactive or unengaged. So what do we mean by that? Within Marketo, we can look at the entire database through a very simple lens. We can look at whether they've been engaging with our email content, right? So have they even opened it? Has it been delivered? We can also look at whether they've engaged with anything on our website. Have they visited the website? If we've got the Munchkin code deployed in through Marketo, we can actually see whether people have been engaging with the website. And we can also look at sales engagement. So if you're using Salesforce, for example, you can see the last activity logged against that individual. So if we run some of these searches, right, let's say we're going to look at anybody who hasn't opened an email in the last 90 days, anybody who hasn't visited the website in the last 90 days, anybody who's not a customer, and anybody who hasn't had any sales engagement or sales activities from Salesforce in the last 90 days, or even Microsoft Dynamics, if you want to go that route. What does that then give us? What does that list look like? What we can start to do is build up that picture of the individuals who are not engaging with the content that we're creating, or maybe they're not part of campaigns, right? So there's something quite interesting here. When we look at unengaged and inactive people, have we actually included them in a campaign, or do we need to then work on including them in a campaign themselves? So start with that list and understanding who is currently in my database, who isn't getting anything. And then you can look at two methods, right? You either go and engage them or you go and remove them. And that might be based on when were they created? How were they created? Where did we collect them from? Are there missing data points? We can also define custom synchronization rules between Salesforce and Marketo and Microsoft Dynamics in Marketo. And if you have a custom integration, you can also do this. It's a little bit more work. But what we can actually start to look at is say, we don't need these people in Marketo, therefore exclude them. We often see that in the world of Marketo and CRM, where there's a one-to-one relationship, you'll have the finance contact streaming in or the legal contact streaming into Marketo. But actually, do we need them in Marketo as part of our marketing activities? Are they the right people for us to be contacting? And if they're not, then let's exclude them. So that custom sync rule is what it's called. You can actually get that in place by contacting Marketo support. There's a couple of steps you're going to have to take in order to get there. So the first one is creating a checkbox on the lead and the contact record, which is disable sync or do not sync or enable sync, whatever way around you want it to be, and then ask Marketo to apply that logic. Marketo support will apply that logic, by basically saying, if this field equals true or it's empty, then enable it to sync or disable it to sync. So again, this can help us control the number of records. Now, there's something which is a bit of a challenge around this custom sync rule, which is always enabling it in the first place, because once we've enabled it on a certain amount of records and we push those back into CRM and keep them there, we've got to add workflows on both sides, right? So if we're enabling or disabling it from the Marketo side, we've got to remove the records we don't want. That's of course going to lose all of the history and activity log that we have for that record. And then on the Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics side, we need a workflow to say, if the email address changes or the status changes, the job title changes, enable it to sync again. So again, have a think about that in terms of, do we have data sets within the system that we don't need? And the continual one that's always quite complicated is the unsubscribe. So if we've got a bunch of unsubscribed people and their customers, do we keep them in? Do we leave them out, etc.? Remember, Marketo is not just about email. So we can also do SMS, we can do WhatsApp, we can do WeChat, whatever it might be. Again, how do you take that data that's within your database and maximize it out to those other challenges as well? Now, you can also analyze the win and losses of your business to understand, actually, do we need this data? So, I'll give you an example. A business I previously worked for wanted to go after education, and we got all this education data from different data sources and events and shows and whatever, and we actually found it very difficult to sell to. Therefore, we kind of retreated and went in a different direction, but we kept all the data thinking that, well, we'll come back to it at some point. Reality is, we didn't find any successes selling to that audience, so why keep it? So we can get rid of that data, we can reduce the overall size of the database and focus on what is actually working. Let's face it, as marketers, we're always under pressure to show what's working, what's not, and show our impact on, of course, the revenue itself. The final thing you can then look at doing is reviewing your Marketo maturity and the capabilities that you've got within the platform. So it's very common, especially if you've inherited a platform in Marketo, and we're talking about platforms here, just to crack on and, try and use what you've got and keep the wheels in motion. But actually, it's good to take a step back and say, well, actually, what have we got available to us? How are we going to go and use this? What does it look like moving forward? So building out that roadmap of how you're going to use the features and functionality, or removing the stuff that you're not going to use. So again, I always try and be realistic and say, web personalization, it's a fantastic tool. Am I going to use it in the next 6 to 12 months? If no, let's take it out of the subscription. We can always add it back in when we've got a pilot. 99 times out of 10, you don't add it back in because you can't find the time to run the pilot, let alone, actually spend the time investigating how to apply it. So I think the key part here always is finding the balance between what is the necessary data that we've got to keep, and how do we then use the functionality that we've got in order to engage those people and find the true return on investment. Of course, that's not always that easy. We do run at JTF Marketing a bunch of data hygiene audits. So if you would be interested in that, we're more than happy to help you do that and give you a view of where can you save some of your database size, and importantly, what can we do in order to reduce that overall license fee. Now, when we talk about visibility, there's of course no easy way to do it in a visual form. That's why we built a data hygiene report, which is part of our data management platform, Merge. And ultimately what we do with this is actively scan the database and understand what is our data set, how many records do we have in the database versus our license fee, what are our opportunities to clean up that database, and importantly, how can we start? Where do we begin? One of the most common challenges is often around bounced records. Again, do we keep them? Do we remove them? Of course, for those of you who are a fan of bounce codes, 550 means the person doesn't exist. And so why would we keep those? Why would we keep them in the database? Again, we can use some clever tools like ZoomInfo and Cognism to go back and say, okay, this person's maybe moved company. Are they still a target? How do we determine whether they're still a target? If you'd like one of these free data hygiene reports, feel free to reach out to us. There'll be a call to action on the email, of course, when it comes to you later on after this webinar. And again, we'd be more than happy to give you one of those free reports, give you some insights into your database size. And this report, you know, it runs every week. So once it's up and running, connected into your Marketo, you can then get a fresh viewpoint every week if you're actively working on your database itself. Now, there is a data management handbook that we've put together. It's quite extensive. It shows a number of ways in which you can reduce the database size and, of course, build always-on rules within Marketo, because you know, there's a lot of tools out there in the market, either plugging into CRM, either data brokers selling you data cleanse projects. Often you don't need those tools, you don't need those services. Actually, what you need to do is look at the data set, look at the data we have held in Marketo, and then make some strategic decisions based on that. So for example, if you've got an invalid email address, what are you going to do with it? You could send it back to sales, back in CRM, give them a time frame to update the email address and check that it's correct, and then bring it back into Marketo. Or what we can actually do is just get rid of it altogether if it's not going to work. So again, there's some decisions there to be made, and often being ruthless is the hardest part of the data set, especially again when it comes back to who's the owner, whether it's sales, marketing, whether it's the business. I think finding the balance there is obviously pretty tough. Now, I kind of mentioned this as we've gone throughout, you know, JTF Marketing, we provide a range of services, so consultancy services, as well as, you know, some free guidance and some tips. So if you need any advice on where to begin, then we'd be more than happy to, you know, get stuck in and help you and just find the path forward, because often it can be quite frustrating. Again, our audits are pretty cool because they will give you a viewpoint of what am I paying for, what am I using, what should I be using next? And it might help you, you know, move on from just doing email marketing into doing some more creative and more personalized activities. So again, consider that from a roadmap perspective, especially as we start 2023. You know, what does that look like from a Marketo perspective? How do we scale things? And importantly, you know, again, how do we make sure that everything that we're building is future-proofed? Because no one likes to keep going around the circle of data cleanse and data hygiene. What is the best way to catch sync errors with Salesforce in an automated fashion? So that's a great question. So let me jump straight into Marketo. There's a couple of areas within Marketo that you can do this. And I know this isn't necessarily always data hygiene related. It can be sync related. Let me just zoom in here a little bit. You'll see this little bell icon in the top right-hand corner. So this little bell is all of the notifications that are coming through for Marketo. Now, one of the things you'll see here, we've got an unable to update person, and you can see we've got Ernie's email address, but she's missing the company field, which is why the error is happening. Now, we can actually build reports in Marketo to, you know, smart lists, which have subscriptions that say, hey, tell us when the company field is empty. What does that mean? It means someone has to go through and punch through and find the company name and populate that field in order to allow it to sync. But what you can do in order to, let's say, automate this experience is you can actually subscribe to the notifications themselves. So you can come in here and select the CRM sync and then subscribe. What you will then get is an email every time that there's a CRM sync error, and this will work with Microsoft Dynamics as well. It looks exactly like this, so it will tell you some information about it. And if there's more than one person, it will tell you how many people are affected as well. So hopefully that answers the question. One of the things that is most common, actually, when it comes to Salesforce sync errors is normally missing fields, missing data points, as well as pick list values being different. So, you know, the one that I always remember is the Republic or the Kingdom of Vietnam or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head now. But again, that doesn't match necessarily the list in Salesforce. So you might be capturing Vietnam on a Marketo form, but actually in Salesforce, it's the Kingdom of Vietnam or whatever the extrapolated name that they have. The next one on the list here is currently when duplicate record is added to Marketo, by default, the oldest record is updated. Is there a way of selecting a record with specific Marketo Salesforce ID to become the mastered record? So within Marketo, there's no automated deduplication, right? So the deduplication within Marketo is selecting two leads and merging them together manually, choosing which field to win and what not to win. Now, our tool, Merge, we do have a deduplication capability within it. We're releasing role sets in the spring, so we'll be able to do just that. So say, you know, highest score over the lowest score, or lead over contact, etc. The default behavior of Marketo when merging person records is lead into contact. So, well, it's Marketo person into Salesforce lead or Dynamics lead. And then from there, we go lead into contact, contact, so on and so forth. So that will give you a bit of a rough idea of how that hangs together. So the rules are possible. You can do it manually. You can also do it through some webhooks. It's a bit more complicated, but as I say, our automated rules will be out in spring. If you need a bit more information on that, again, happy to pick that up separately and see how we can answer that. The next one that is on the list here, let me just see, is what is the recommended measurement of if someone is unengaged, inactive, how many emails? My leadership is hesitant to remove anyone from our lists and likes to continually blasting to the largest list possible. So it's hard to convince them that removing these contacts is beneficial. Well, yeah, I suppose there's a hard conversation there, right? Is whether we want to spend the money on the license fee or whether we want to cut them out. When I'm looking at the people who are not engaging, I'm often looking at it from the perspective of, let me just build a quick list here. I always look at it from the perspective of who hasn't engaged within a period of time, right? So if we do not opened, for example, not open, we can also do sales email. This time frame becomes pretty critical. I mean, you could even put it up to 365 days, right? So you could say it is any, and then see how many people you've got back. Again, you've got some of the activity filters as well, which come through now. So again, you can look at has not visited the website. You can also look at maybe whether they've clicked anything if you wanted to go, but I think always open is better than click, because there's a lot of people where stuff just goes straight to spam and they're not looking at it. I would go mainly by time frame, because I think that's better, right, than saying they haven't engaged with 3 emails. Okay, but 3 emails is nothing. We all know how our diaries get and how stuff gets pretty busy. Therefore, I would look at it over a period of time in order to then suggest that these people aren't engaging. Again, the other one is fills out form, right? So even if they are coming to our website or even social channels and they're not filling anything out, and again, you're going to play with your advanced logic up here as well, I would then be looking at saying, okay, if this person is not engaging or they're just watching everything we're doing, at some point they're going to come back into the database anyway if they're interested. Unless your message is drastically changing time and time again, I think there's probably a limited chance that they will convert unless they're already there and wanting to buy. Of course, then we can think about, you know, how do we keep people engaged and how do we nurture them on an ongoing basis. I think one of the things about unengaged people is always looking at when did they last receive something. Within Marketo, that's actually a bit tricky because you can't actually just quickly pull a report and say, when was the last email sent to each individual, unless you're updating last touch campaign, last campaign sent date, etc. So that might be something that's worth applying to then start to see whether you can actually find any evidence around who could or couldn't be removed from the database. So hopefully that answers the questions. The next one is how to calculate net new names acquired by programs in the past 1 year. So that's actually really easy. It's more of a reporting thing than it is data, but very quickly, if you're using progression statuses on your programs, you can actually start to see it in the analytics. So if we go into program performance, you should be able to see everybody that's been acquired by each one of those programs. So you can start to see total number of members. Now, if you wanted to then start filtering some of this, you would actually have to use a people performance report instead. So that will then allow you to do time frame. You can actually then start to apply it. Of course, you can always look at the campaign itself and start to see some of the history over time because you have it on the membership tab. The next question here is, do you have any tips for purging Marketo Activity History in Salesforce? I'm assuming that is from the integration. So for those of you who don't know, within your integration, you can actually enable different activities to be created within Salesforce against a lead or a contact record, which allows non-Marketo users to see the information. The big debate here is always whether you want to store everything against a lead as an activity. Of course, you can filter views within Salesforce as well, so that you can hide certain activity types from different individuals. So that's one way of purging them, let's say, or hiding them. If you want to delete them en masse, I believe you have to do it through IDs, and you can upload a list of IDs into Salesforce, which will automatically delete them. So yeah, there's always a tough challenge there in managing the overall number of activities. The next one is, if our custom CRM is our single point of truth and Marketo cannot delete records, it can only update them, how can we best utilize Marketo for data cleansing? That's a brilliant question. This is always going back to that point of truth, right? And fixing the point of truth and making sure that it's accurate. I think the key thing here is taking the data that we collect within Marketo, right? So when we start looking at records themselves and data hygiene, again, what can we do in order to then update those? So when we start looking at some of the pieces of information we collect, has it been blacklisted? Is it bouncing? Have they left the company? What other information can we collect? Then again, I would look at some of those items and feed those back into your CRM. And then what you can start to do is build your synchronization rules to filter those people out or remove them altogether, right? So we've had previous clients of ours using custom CRMs where we push back information to those lead objects or person objects. They then process that information on their side by running a batch in the background to say, get rid of all these people. They'll mark a flag and send that back to Marketo, which then will remove it from Marketo as well. So trying to just get that loop nice and clean can be a little bit challenging, but it's definitely a worthwhile process. I've got a bit of a blueprint for it if you'd like me to share it with you, but hopefully you can get most of that. There is a question of whether this is being recorded. It is, and we will share it with you after this call. So if you do have to jump off, then feel free, and we'll share this over to you later on. The next question is something around email validation. So how do we enable email validation within Marketo? There's two ways of doing this. Depending on your business, depending on the size of your business, you may choose to use a tool, a third-party tool. So something like Never Bounce, for example, is something we use on our website. So if I go to our website here, and I quickly jump over to one of our services, let's say lead scoring models, and I go to fill out the form. Actually, I've got a pre-fill on my form already. There you go. And I throw in my details here. You'll see that this valid email address pops up. Now, this is one way you can do it. So as you capture the data, as it's going into your system, you can do it that way. And of course, what you want to do is make sure that anybody then that's been validated is being dropped into Marketo with an email status of valid. Now, when we start looking at email verification, there's a couple of things that we might then want to look at. And I've got my little program down here, which is Never Bounce. We've got a few steps that we might want to put in place. So we've got the initial verification of someone that's added into the database. So let's say they're added into Salesforce, we bring them in, and then we update them and give them an email status of valid. We then need to re-trigger this activity after a set amount of time. You can see there's 2 disabled here, which is a nice investigation for someone later to understand why have we not get the revalidation programs in place. What that will allow you to do is keep checking the database is accurate and the email addresses are accurate. Therefore, we can actually market to them. So when we start to see high bounce rates, again, it's worthwhile looking at running email verification, again, as you capture data or as the data is synchronizing over or as one-off batches, right? You might want to do it every quarter. And again, we've done that for some of our customers. So if you need some support on that, again, we can look at those examples and see whether we're able to support that. When it comes to a few quick wins that you can work on, there's a couple of rules that you'll see here on the left-hand side that we often implement. So getting rid of people with empty email addresses, just deleting them all together. Again, you may choose to push those back to sales, depending on whether you've got that many of them. It's fairly straightforward, this program, our smart campaign. We're targeting anybody, of course, with an empty email address, especially when the person is created. And then we're actually deleting them in our case, but you could, of course, send an alert back to sales. This person's been deleted because XYZ, or you could actually then change the sync flag as well. The other one that's important to get out of your database pretty quick is blacklisted. So you'll see it's actually been renamed recently to blocklisted. So blocklisted is where you have been blocked either by the ISP or by the mail server itself. So if you're targeting some larger enterprises, you may find this a bit of a challenge. Again, checking who's been blocklisted, and then again, getting rid of them. The reality is to get that block off is often pretty tough. So again, take your view of how you're going to approach them. Again, there's a lot of customers out there in everybody's market. So do you want to focus on the people that have blocked you, or do you want to crack on with the people that are engaging already? Is always the tough question. Again, you might choose to remove private email addresses if you are not targeting B2C or not interested in having private email addresses in your database. That's one way of cleaning up the data. And then actually one of the things that's worth always having a look at is employee bands, industries, etc. Again, standardizing those within the data set. So making sure that that data set that you are populating is accurate, is consistent, and then allows you to report on it. There is a few ways, again, you can start to handle some of these reports. So if I go into my database, well, you'll see here, I've got empty fields that I can run reports on. And again, I can choose to subscribe to these lists. If I wanted to do smart list subscription, then I'll get notification of that list every X amount of time that I want that information. Now, data hygiene, of course, in Marketo is a huge topic, and I appreciate we've just run 5 minutes over. If you have got any questions, and I know I haven't got to all of the questions on today's webinar, but I'll do my best to come back to you with an answer. Please do let us know. We'll be more than happy to give you a bit more detail. As I say, there's a lot to go through when it comes to data hygiene. Talk to us about your specific challenges. We'd love to hear them and love to know what other content we can put together that will help you specifically manage data hygiene in Marketo, because everybody's use case is different, everybody's challenges are different. And of course, please do join us for the next webinar. Our next webinar is on Thursday. It's the Ask the Experts webinar. So our team of consultants will be on the phone answering your questions that you submit live and pre-event. So feel free to join us for that webinar. And again, we'll share the link with you after this call. As I say, feel free to reach out. We're more than happy to give you as much advice as we possibly can and help you navigate data hygiene within Marketo itself. I hope you have a great day, and thank you very much for joining us today.